Welcome in, everyone, to Beyond the Beat with 32 Beat Writers. I'm your host, Zach Hyduk, and today I am here with Justin Graver, Titans expert. You may know him as the Grave Digger. Justin is a digital producer with Fox Sports and host of the Tennessee Titans podcast, the Music City Audible, where you can also find him is over on Twitter at Titans Film Room. Justin, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Zach. I'm excited to be back here. Glad you reached out to get me back on. Ready to talk some football and talk some Titans.
Yeah, me too. And we had to do a re-rec here. We had a little bit of rehearsal, so we should have a good one lined up for you. Justin had a lot of really good information the first time before I hit record. So hopefully we have an equally good time here on the second time around.
Yeah, I think we'll be good. It gave us a chance to warm up, get my brain rolling. Now I can do it better the second time.
There you go. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks again, like I said, for joining. We've got a lot of major changes from the Titans last year, and that's why I wanted to have you on. A couple weeks ago when the Tyler Boyd news dropped, I grabbed a quote from your emergency show that I was watching with you guys live. Some good stuff there from you on that Music City Audible podcast, which you can also watch on YouTube, which is where I was grabbing that. So thanks for the permission to use that quote there. But I wanted to get you on because recently you released a podcast on your regular feed there, 2024 offensive stat projections for the offense, as I mentioned, and you had a lot of really, really good information there. You did a conservative, a middle of the road, kind of what we should probably expect, and an aggressive expectations, and you had a whole spreadsheet and everything with everything laid out there. So I want to dig into that a little more and just see what you think the Titans will be this year.
Yeah, I think the first thing, the Titans are going to look a lot different in 2024 than what we've seen from this team, not just under the Mike Vrabel era, but I think dating all the way back to when the team first moved from Houston in 1997. And this has always been a ground and pound sort of bully ball, 3 yards in a cloud of dust team that had, one of the top backs in the league. And whether it was Eddie George, Chris Johnson, Derrick Henry, like that's just been the identity of this team for so long. And Brian Callahan is going to change that. I think there's going to be a huge shift in how much the run distribution, pass run ratio of this offense, especially when you talk about like early down pass rate, early down run rate. The Titans have ranked last in the league in early down pass rate, at least last year, and they've routinely been at the bottom of that metric. Brian Callahan's Bengals were second in the league in early down pass rate last year, and we've seen this trend sort of spreading across the NFL for the innovative, the modern offenses that want to pass the ball more on our early downs because, it takes an advantage of a defense that's set up in their base defense maybe to stop the run, and then you attack them through the air. So I think that's the way the Titans are going to try to attack defenses this year. We saw it in the offseason moves as they try to remake the image of this team. They let Derrick Henry go in free agency. He was, the face of this franchise for years. So they're going to have a whole new identity right off the bat. Then you bring in a wide receiver like Calvin Ridley, who can arguably be your wide receiver one alongside DeAndre Hopkins. They add Tyler Boyd, as you mentioned, bring in Tony Pollard, add a center in Lloyd Cushenberry, add the first round left tackle, JC Latham. So they've done a lot to sort of beef up this offense and give Will Levis the best chance to succeed. But when you talk about trying to project this offense and what it's going to look like this year, the first place I started was with that pass run ratio, where the Titans have been sort of at the bottom of the league in terms of pass rate. Brian Callahan's Bengals have passed the ball 61% of snaps since he took over as offensive coordinator there. And that didn't matter. The first season he got there, Andy Dalton was still the quarterback. Obviously, they draft Joe Burrow, but then he gets hurt, and they're playing backups in his rookie year. One of his first 2 seasons, they're playing backups. Last season, Burrow gets another season-ending injury. Jake Browning takes over. So it's not just been because they had Joe Burrow where they were this early down passing team. That's just the philosophical approach that Brian Callahan has taken to offenses. You want to win through the air. So I think that is going to be a huge shift that NFL fans just aren't used to seeing that kind of offense from Tennessee.
Yeah. Let's dig into that a little bit more because I'm curious to know how that's going to help or maybe hurt, whatever your opinion there would be, of how that will impact Will Levis. Because I was listening to your show, and I mean, if you were watching a Titans game, that Will Levis takes a lot of hits, a lot of sacks. Last year, I think you said he had a 9.4 percent sack rate. And you statted all those things out too. So again, people should check that out. You had a lot of good stuff over there. Do you think you mentioned like passing on early downs? Do you think a lot of that will help Will Levis get a little bit more comfortable, not take as many hits, hopefully avoid some of those negative plays?
Yeah, I do think it will. There is something to be said about a quarterback's propensity to turn pressures into sacks or turn pressures into non-sacks in the positive way. A lot of times, guys who have a high pressure to sack percentage doesn't change with scheme, offensive line, whatever it is. Like those guys want to hold the ball, make something happen. They will take sacks. And I think Levis actually ended up with a 9.9% sack rate last
Okay.
year. In my projections, I had 9.4, like you said, but
Okay.
that's because I took out the games that he left early with injury. So I just used the 8 full games that he started and finished for those stats because I think it's a better measure, obviously, when it comes to like pass attempts per game and things like that. But yeah, I do think having an offense that prioritizes the pass is going to make life easier on him because they're going to use the passing game not just to balance the run attack. Like under Mike Vrabel and even under Mike Mularkey, it was a lot of run to set up play action, to set up deep shots down the field and using the passing game almost as like a complement to the run game or as a way to attack defenses who are loading up to stop the run. Defenses aren't going to be able to do that. They're not going to want to do that. Now that Derrick Henry's not in the backfield, I mean, that's the main reason that the Titans have been that kind of offense, obviously. But they also invited a lot of bodies into the box. They ran a lot of tight formations. They ran a lot of 2 tight end, 3 tight end sets, which brings the defense in close to the line of scrimmage to match what the offensive alignment is showing them. The Titans aren't going to do that anymore. They're not going to run the ball against a 8-man box that they're inviting. I think there's a big misconception in football about like running into 8-man boxes. It's more about the numbers advantage the offense may or may not have. If there are 9 guys on the offense inside the tackle box and there are 8 defenders up in the box for the defense, then the offense technically has a 9-8 advantage, right? But you talk about Derrick Henry constantly ran into loaded boxes. A lot of that was self-inflicted by the Titans bringing in these big, heavy formations. So I think that is going to be a thing of the past. And the early down pass rate, the passing game isn't going to be used to complement the run. It's going to be used like as an extension of the run game, like the types of passes where you throw it out to a wide receiver because the cornerback is sagging off 6 to 8 yards and the receiver can try to make that DB miss. But if he doesn't, he still probably picks up 3, 4, 5 yards. That's like a successful run play on 1st and 10, but you do it through the air and it just keeps the defense guessing. So I think making the reads easier for Will Levis on a lot of plays, design plays that are intended to get the ball out of his hand on a 3-step drop within 1.5 to 2 seconds. So the offensive line doesn't even have to hold up. If they are incapable of doing so, it doesn't matter. I do think as Titans fans, we've talked a lot about how, Brian Callahan with the Bengals never had a great offensive line. The year they went to the Super Bowl, I think PFF had them rated as like the 28th or something like that offensive line in the league. And it's Brian Callahan able to make it work with that offense, despite having a big weakness on the offensive line. I will say a lot of that is Joe Burrow and his ability to navigate pressure and the whole, like I mentioned, pressure to sack percentage. Joe Burrow pretty good at avoiding sacks and getting the ball out. Will Levis, I do think that's probably his biggest weakness, but they're going to do everything they can to help get the ball out of his hands, to help make the reads cleaner. And like you said, to get him in a rhythm early in the game, not force him to like hand off. Now it's 3rd and 8. Good luck. You haven't thrown a pass yet this drive. Now you got to convert a 3rd and 8 when the defense knows you have to pass it. So I think those sequences will be largely eliminated. Brian Callahan even talked about that with Robert Mays on the Athletic Football Show. He talking about his relationship with Joe Burrow. The one time he called a run pass, Joe Burrow came over to the sideline and said, "Don't ever do that to me again," or something along those lines. So I think Brian Callahan is very aware of like the kind of pressure that puts on a quarterback, and he's going to do everything he can to avoid that.
Yeah, I know like Warren Sharp puts out stats on that all the time about early down, throwing and all of that and how much of an advantage it is. So that's good to hear that they're going to do that. And hopefully, as you mentioned, it's going to help out the wide receivers that they added. We mentioned Tyler Boyd already and Calvin Ridley. DeAndre Hopkins, of course, is still there. So my kind of question is, how do things play out at that wide receiver position? And who do you think becomes the wide receiver 1, if anybody?
So when I was projecting out these stats, this is the thing that gave me the most sort of where I'm guessing the most, I guess is the best way to put it, because the target share, like who's going to command the most targets in this offense, I think it's going to depend on what role they put these guys in first and foremost. Calvin Ridley last year with Jacksonville was miscast as an X receiver, a guy who is, very much aligned the farthest away from the rest of the offensive line and the rest of the skill player, like aligned on his own, far side of the field, tight to the line of scrimmage, doesn't go in motion before the snap, is just sort of out there on an island against a cornerback. His best role on an offense is to be more of the flanker Z receiver, the detached receiver who's a couple steps off the line of scrimmage, who can go in motion before the snap, who can move around to find mismatches. So I think that's how Calvin Ridley is going to be used. I think DeAndre Hopkins will be that X receiver. At this stage of his career, he doesn't have that top end speed to threaten as much over the top. Now, we did see him make a handful of plays, long catches down the field from Will Levis last year. That Falcons game stands out. He had a long touchdown on a flea flicker against Jacksonville last year. Like he still has that in him, but it's not the main part of his game anymore. I think he's slightly miscast as an X receiver, but it's sort of the role he's going to have to step into because Tyler Boyd's going to be your slot guy. But at the same time, they're not going to run 11 personnel on every snap where DeAndre Hopkins is always the X and Calvin Ridley's always the Z and Tyler Boyd's always in the slot. Like there will be plays where Hopkins lines up in the slot. There will be plays where Ridley is aligned as the X and is trying to take the top off the defense. So they're all going to have to know pretty much every receiver spot there. The biggest question to me is these guys are all 30 or older, right? This is the oldest trio of wide receivers in the NFL. On the one hand, that brings a lot of experience, especially when you have a young second-year quarterback like Will Levis, when you have a first-time head coach, first-time play caller and Brian Callahan. Having guys who have succeeded at a high level for many years in the NFL is huge. At the same time, can their bodies take a 17-week season? Can they play as many snaps as a 23, 24, 25-year-old receiver over the course of the season? Or are they going to have to rotate more to keep their bodies fresh for what you hope is a playoff run? I don't know if the Titans will be that good this year, but the coaching staff is going to plan like they will be because that's their expectation, right? So where does that leave a guy like Treylon Burks, Nick Westbrook-Akina, Kyle Phillips, like guys who have been part of the Titans receiver rotation, key members of the Titans receiving core before they added guys like DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd. Those guys are all now slotted at like wide receiver 4, 5, and 6 in whatever order you think they may end up. Like that's probably the hardest thing to project about this offense. So I looked at target shares for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, season-long target share. Even that sometimes hard to get a good read on because T. Higgins missed a bunch of games last year. Jamar Chase missed a bunch of games the year before that. So looking at who dominated the target share, it's like, well, when somebody misses 6 games, obviously they got a lot fewer targets. But I think generally it's almost going to be like a 1A, 1B with Ridley and Hopkins. I think they're going to be very close when you look at their total targets at the end of the year. And I think Ridley probably outproduces Hopkins because I think he's going to be more of a downfield stretcher than Hopkins, who's going to be more of a safety valve. But both guys are going to make a lot of big plays in the passing game.
If you had to pick the aggressive stats, what did you have Ridley at in your aggressive metrics? Do you remember?
Yeah, so my aggressive projection, I had Ridley with a 23% target share, which I think is the highest place I put him in any of my projections. And, in the aggressive approach, I'm thinking more downfield shots, more explosive plays to your most explosive receiver, which is Calvin Ridley. And so I projected him at 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns this season on 83 catches, which, that'd be a great year. That'd be one of the best years a Titans receiver has had in quite some time. So that would be great. And then I also had Hopkins over 1,000 yards, just barely, but in my aggressive projection, which is sort of the everything goes right projection. Yeah. Like the offensive line isn't terrible. Will Levis takes a step. Brian Callahan's not in over his head as a first-time play caller. Everything goes right with the offense. I had Will Levis at 4,400 yards, 36 touchdowns, and Ridley with 1,100 of those yards and 11 touchdowns. So I did project Ridley to be the leading receiver.
Yeah, I think that's just helpful for us as we, and especially like fantasy people or whoever might be listening here, just to give kind of if everything, like you said, works perfectly, here's kind of what we think what you think the best case scenario might be. So that's good context. We had a couple questions when I posted on X, and several of them were about wide receivers that you mentioned. Sean wanted to know what happened to Kyle Phillips, and then I want to know, of course, and we had some questions about Treylon Burks. When Boyd signed, it just seemed like that was kind of, well, I guess Treylon Burks isn't in the team in like 6 months. But I do want to know, because you mentioned these guys are older, the guys who are going to be the starters, and how is that going to work? Are any of these guys going to be on the team in 6 to 12 months? What do you think there?
I actually, if I had to project the receivers that make the Titans roster, the 6 that we have mentioned on the show are the ones I would project. The Titans drafted a receiver in the 6th round this year, Jaquan Jackson, out of Tulane. Now, he may end up being a guy who makes the team because he can play special teams. He's probably going to be their primary kick and punt returner. So if they keep 7, which would be a stretch to me, I do think he's probably the 7th. But the top 6 right now, at pending training camp, injuries, and everything else that's going to happen, are those obviously the big 3, Hopkins, Ridley, and Boyd, then Treylon Burks, Nick Westbrook-Akina, and Kyle Phillips. What happened to Kyle Phillips? Well, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. He has dealt with so many injuries in his career, and he has flashed big time for this Titans team in games where he did stay healthy. Week 1, 2 years ago against the Giants, he was the most productive receiver on the field for the Titans. He set up what would have been the game-winning field goal that was not made, so the Titans lost that game. But he was huge on that last drive. And then last season, his best game, I think, was the Pittsburgh Steelers game, where he really flashed a connection with Will Levis, made some plays in the 2-minute drill over the middle of the field at the sideline, really showed like a rapport with the young quarterback, but then has had trouble staying on the field. So he's a guy that if he's healthy and you can get some snaps out of him, it's great. But the Titans aren't going into the season relying on Kyle Phillips to be a contributor just because he can't really be counted on to stay healthy. Nick Westbrook-Akina is sort of your non-dynamic, non-explosive veteran who can do it all. He can play all 3 receiver spots. He's very cerebral. He knows where to be, knows the playbook, knows what's expected of him. So he's always going to be there on time and on target. But is he going to be open? Is he going to create separation? Is he going to make guys miss and create explosive plays? That's not really his forte. But he's a reliable veteran. So I think he'll have his fair share of snaps as well. He's a guy that's played a lot of special teams in his career. And then it's Treylon Burks, the former first-round pick, who a lot of expectations when he was drafted to come in and be the guy to replace A.J. Brown. Probably never fair of anyone to put those expectations on him when he was just a rookie entering the league, and then dealt with injuries, dealt with the asthma and the conditioning problems that had plagued him throughout his rookie year, came back strong in the offseason before his second year, had a ton of offseason hype and buzz last year, and then suffered an injury in a joint practice, I think, with the Vikings, and never really regained his footing. Had a couple of big plays down the stretch of the season in one game, but never really put things together last year. And so he's been a disappointment. So now you go into year 3 for Treylon Burks. Obviously, the coaching staff is not expecting much out of him. If they were, they would not have added Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd. So he's been relegated to wide receiver 4 at best. That's if he can play above Nick Westbrook-Akina and above Kyle Phillips. And on Wednesday, Titans offensive coordinator said he's got to play special teams to have a role in this offense. If he wants to be active on game day, he's got to play special teams. That raised some eyebrows across the league. But if you think about it, like, that's the case for every wide receiver 4 in the NFL. There's no wide receiver 4 in the NFL that's making a roster and being active on game day if they aren't contributing on special teams, because he's not a starter. Everyone who's not a starter who plays a skill position has to have a role on special teams to contribute. That's just the way it goes in the NFL. So it wasn't that surprising for me to hear that. The most surprising thing I heard was offensive coordinator Nick Holtz say Treylon Burks has surpassed our expectations thus far. Because I'm thinking that must have been easy. His expectations, what were his expectations?
Yeah.
He cannot have been very high. So I think Treylon Burks has got to show that he can back up all 3 receiver spots, that he can be trusted to know the playbook and know where he's supposed to be from every spot, and carve out a role on special teams. That's asking a lot of a guy who's not done that in his career before. So I don't know if we're going to see a huge contribution from Treylon Burks. I think he will have opportunities because, like I said, these receivers are older. They're going to need to take more breaks than your average guy. They're probably going to miss a game or 2 here and there throughout the year. And Treylon Burks is going to have to step up in those moments and prove that he even belongs really as an NFL player at this point in his career.
Yeah. I think you do have to assume some of those injuries, as you mentioned, especially for somebody like Hopkins, who's as old as he is. But when that quote came out and we retweeted it, it just buried the guy. I think they maybe came out later at some point and kind of tried to walk it back a little bit. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was pretty yeah, a big thing when it came out. So I do want to ask about the running backs then. So moving on from the wide receivers, if they're going to be passing first, how are we going to see that work out? Because we have Pollard coming in. We have Tyjae Spears, who was there last year. And I was looking at stats from last year just to kind of prep for this a bit. And I was a little bit surprised that Tyjae Spears had 70 targets last year, at only about 100 attempts. And Derrick Henry had, I think, 280. On your podcast, I believe you had Spears doubling the amount of attempts, somewhere in the 200 range, I believe. And then we also have had a coach, I forget which one, it might have been Callahan, come out and say that they're kind of interchangeable. So how do you see these guys working in the backfield and what their roles, if they're any different, could be?
Yeah, what's interesting, I think, is when you look at Brian Callahan's history, first of all, it's hard to project because he's never had a two-back tandem like this. Like, I think the closest thing was probably last year when he had Joe Mixon and Chase Brown. He had Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine for a few years there as well. But Joe Mixon has always been like their RB1, clear, uncontested, right? I don't think that's going to be the case with Spears and Pollard. I think these guys are really going to share the backfield a lot. The neat thing about them, so different from when the Titans have had guys like Derrick Henry and Tyjae Spears, where if Derrick Henry's on the field, sort of tips the hand of what the offense is going to do. It's either going to be a run or a play action pass. You're not going to split Henry out wide against a linebacker and try to take advantage of a mismatch, because that's not really a mismatch for Derrick Henry. When Tyjae Spears comes in, it's like, okay, this is probably a pass. Maybe it's a draw play, or maybe we try to catch the defense off guard with a run, which, you know, like you said, he had close to 100 carries. So it wasn't like every time he came on the field, it was a pass, obviously, but it does tip the hand a little bit. Now you have two guys who are more or less interchangeable. They can both run between the tackles pretty well. They're not the best between the tackles runners in the NFL, but they're good enough there. They can get on the edge. They can beat you with speed. They can make you miss, and they can catch out of the backfield, and they can protect in, pass protection as well. So those guys, when I projected it, I had Tyjae Spears as sort of the 1A to Tony Pollard's 1B. I gave Tyjae Spears 45% of the total carries and Tony Pollard 40%. And then that leaves, another 15% for quarterback scrambles, end around, jet sweep type plays. RB3 comes in every once in a while to spell those guys, and we don't even know who the RB3 is going to be in Tennessee. But it could be the opposite. It could be Tony Pollard with 45% and Tyjae Spears with 40%. I don't think either guy's going to run away with the rushing share in this offense. I don't think you're going to see a 50%, 55% rushing share from either of these guys, because they are so interchangeable and you want to keep both guys fresh. You don't want to have either one take a pounding. And the reason I put Spears as the 1A to Pollard's 1B is because that's the best that we've ever seen Pollard look, is when he was the 1B to Ezekiel Elliott. Last season, he takes on that lead dog role, and he was coming back from an injury. So obviously that affected some of his efficiency numbers and ability to be explosive. But he also just wasn't quite as effective in that role. And then minicamp and OTAs get underway, and you see them running drills, and you don't really know, the beat writers who are there aren't even allowed to report who's running with the first team, who's running with the second team, because it violates the team, secret rules and all that. But you see the quarterbacks doing their like warm-up drills where they hand the ball off, and then a coach tosses them the ball and they roll out and throw it. Will Levis was doing that with Tony Pollard, and Mason Rudolph was doing that with Tyjae Spears. Does that mean anything? I don't know. Definitely seems like Tony Pollard would be your 1A, though, in that scenario. Ultimately, does it matter who takes the first snap of the year at running back? Probably not. Like I said, both guys are going to touch the ball a lot. The one thing I would worry about with these two when it comes to like fantasy, for example, Brian Callahan's Bengals averaged 24 rush attempts per game over 5 years. 24. If you imagine that a handful of those are going to be quarterback scrambles, a handful of those are going to be the jet sweeps and the end arounds, how many carries does that really leave for the running backs? 20? How many carries does that leave for Pollard and Spears? 12 and 8 in a given game? Obviously, there's going to be games where they are more run heavy, where they're trying to bleed the clock in the fourth quarter. But then there's going to be games where they're trying to catch up in the fourth quarter and they're not as run heavy. So at the end of the day, if Tony Pollard averages 11 carries a game, how viable is that going to be for fantasy football purposes? If Tyjae Spears averages 9 or 10 carries a game, like how viable is that going to be? But like I said, Callahan hasn't had two backs that can carry a load like this. So do the rush attempts go up because of that? these are all things that we're going to learn in his first year as the play caller, because it's hard to project something that you haven't seen before.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's like a 20 spot difference in ADP and projections, depending on who you're looking at. If you're looking at things from a fantasy perspective, which can kind of give an understanding of what the community thinks. And so Pollard is going ahead 20 spots for what it's worth of Spears. And so, I mean, it seems like most people assume that it's just, well, they brought Pollard in, and so he's going to be the guy or ahead of Spears. But as you mentioned, it could be a pretty even split there, and maybe there isn't as much as we would hope. So I do think that's a really interesting thing to wrestle with as you kind of maybe making those decisions here in the next couple months. One thing really, really quick. Some of the guys on the team are going to hate that I'm even asking this. Is Tyjae Spears going to be returning in the new kickoff, under the new kickoff rules? Is he going to be doing that? He did some last year, so that's why I'm asking.
I think there's a chance that he could win that job. I think it depends on how they feel about the guy I mentioned earlier, 6th-round rookie, Jaquan Jackson, who was a wide receiver returner at Tulane. He profiles, I mean, we haven't seen him on the NFL field, so it's hard to say, but just profile-wise, he probably fits that mold the best. Number one, you'd hate to have Spears suffer an injury on a play like that, especially where we don't know what that play is even going to look like in the NFL right now with the new kickoff rules. So you don't want to risk injury to a key piece of your offense. And at the same time, Jackson has speed, he has elusiveness, and he's done it at the college level. So he's just got to prove that he can have a role as a special teamer, not just as a returner, but probably as like a gunner on kickoffs and punts as well, and prove that if somebody goes down in the middle of a game and he's got to play a handful of snaps out of the slot, can he do it? Can he go out there and succeed? He's looked pretty good from the, clips I've seen out of minicamp and OTAs. He's looked pretty like explosive and good hands, like natural hands catcher of the ball as a receiver. So I think that that's promising for him. If I had to like bet money right now on who wins the job, I would probably give it to him. But if he proves to be unreliable or too green, too much of a rookie, they want to put him on the practice squad and let him sort of get some seasoning in the league first, then I think your second option probably would be Tyjae Spears.
Okay, so just something a little bit to keep a side eye on there. I just think that that's going to be a pretty chaotic play to start the season, and I'm wondering if he might get some occasional touchdowns. So I keep getting crud for it, but I just it's really interesting to me this year. So I don't know how that plays out.
I'm with you on that. I think this is going to be one of those things where some innovative coach around the league is going to figure something out early that gives his team a massive advantage for like 3 to 5 weeks while the rest of the league catches up and is like, wait, they're doing it this way. We never thought of that. One thing we've seen already, the Chiefs are reporting that Justin Reed's going to kick off for them because he's a safety. He can go down and make tackles after he kicks the ball, save Harrison Butker the potential injury and the contact and the needing to make a potential touchdown saving tackle. Get a safety in there to do that. Is that something we're going to see from teams where they're like, okay, random defensive players, which one of you guys can kick well? Because we're going to train you to be our kickoff guy. I think that's like, I do think there's going to be some very interesting wrinkles with this kickoff thing. If Bill Belichick was still coaching in the league, like he's the guy I would put money on to figure out, find the edge here that other teams aren't finding. But with him, not having a job right now, I would say Andy Reid's probably going to be that guy who figures out that whatever that edge is.
Yeah, I suppose that makes pretty logical sense. So, all right, for everybody else who doesn't give a crap, I guess we'll move on. But I think it's interesting, so I'm glad you think so too. With the tight ends, we got Chigga there, who seems to stick out the most as the guy that we assume will be the most productive. Last year, he was 54 for 528 and a touchdown in 2023. What do you think will be his outcome this year?
So if we just look at my projections, I was pretty torn on how to do these tight ends here. I ended up just saying, okay, Chigga Okonkwo is the tight end one. I gave him 12% target share. That in my aggressive projection, the best case scenario, I gave him 583 yards on 47 catches, close to the numbers he put up last season, maybe a little bit better. But I don't know if that's how the offense is going to shake out. Josh Whyle, second year guy who was drafted last year, is a guy that many people who are following this team closely, one of my colleagues at Broadway Sports Media, Mike Herndon, has a take brewing where he thinks Josh Whyle could supplant Chig as tight end one as early as this season. He's a bigger bodied guy. He's a lot taller. He's just as athletic as Chig. He made some nice plays last year, flashed at times, ultimately ended up on injured reserve to end the season. But he's a talented guy who has shown some promise. So it's going to be interesting because, again, relying a lot on Brian Callahan's history with Cincinnati, which it's a different roster, it's a different team. We don't know how much this is all going to translate, but never really featured a tight end heavily in those offenses. They were pretty content to rotate through the Tanner Hudsons and the Irv Smiths and whatever other bodies they could throw at that position throughout Callahan's time there in Cincinnati. Let guys walk in free agency like Tyler Eifert and was Tyler Eifert? Am I going back too far? They had a guy that they let walk in free agency.
He was there over the last 5 years, I think. So
yeah, right. So they've never really CJ Uzama, guys like that. Like they've had guys that had a flashy season and then they let him walk in free agency and they just popped another body in there and let the next guy do the same role. So it's interesting. Like I said, it's not going to be a lot of 2 tight end sets anymore. It's going to be a lot more 11 personnel, which the Titans haven't seen a lot of. So only 1 tight end on the field a lot of the time. Who is that going to be? Is it going to be Chig in line, moving in the backfield, H-back style? Is it going to be Wiley, more like a Y type of role out there, lined up tight to the line of scrimmage or set up in the slot? I think that's going to be one of the more fascinating, underrated parts of this offense. And I think, if you're a fantasy football player, I would avoid Chig Okonkwo. I would not take the chance. He was a really trendy sleeper pick last year based on his super high efficiency rookie season. He led tight ends in yards after catch, broken tackles, force per catch, yards per route run. He was historically efficient for a rookie tight end. And then he got a bigger workload and a higher volume last year. And all those efficiency numbers dropped off massively. His drop rate went through the roof. He wasn't breaking as many tackles. He wasn't making as many guys miss. So this is sort of, I think, underratedly a make or break year for him now, because if he gets supplanted by Josh Wiley, what's his future look like? He's not going to go be a tight end 1 again somewhere. He can probably have a role. Obviously, he'll be a backup tight end who comes in and makes plays and is explosive on certain, looks. But ultimately, what does his career look like if he can't get it done this year? Josh Wiley's younger than him. I know historically it takes tight ends 2, 3, 4 years to really break out in the league. Less so recently with, Sam Laporta's and Kyle Pitts going out there and setting rookie records. But I think you asked me the question. I can't really answer it, to be honest. I think it's a mystery. I would lean towards Chig being that guy, but I could also see more of an even split between these 2 guys where they're just rotating every other drive who's the tight end on the field.
Yeah, Josh Wiley, that is a deep cut. 6'7", 248, at least according to Pro Football Reference here. So, all right. Yeah, that's a good nugget there for any of you who are listening on Chig to potentially avoid him. So the team in general then, right now, I think they're set at the lowest over-under in the division that they're in at 6.5. Do you think that's fair? And are you taking the over or the under on that this year?
I think it's fair because there's so many question marks with what this Titans team is going to look like. Now, I think the offseason moves they've made have been severely underrated by national media. And obviously, as someone close to the team, I'm going to think that, there's definitely bias
Sure.
there. But you add high floor players across the roster. I mean, upgrading the center position, I can't understate how massive that I can't overstate how massive that upgrade is there. You turn a weak point on your offensive line and on your team in general into a big time strength. The center, the pivot point of that offensive line, is arguably the most important player. I would argue it's more important than who you have at left tackle, because the center is responsible for calling out protections, for making sure that is a cohesive unit. The Titans had a great center who was a great leader in Ben Jones. He retired. They didn't bring him back for in free agency a couple of years ago, and then he went on to retire. They elevated a former UDFA and Aaron Brewer, and they said, "We think you're really tough and gritty, and we like your attitude, and you can move well in space, so you're good in the run game. So you're going to be our starting center now." And he got bullied in pass protection, constantly pushed back in the pocket. And when your quarterback has to deal with interior pressure like that, it's not the same as getting pressure off the edges. It can really affect you. We've seen it. Historically, famously, Tom Brady was like, if you can get pressure up the middle, that's how you disrupt the greatest quarterback of all time. And you can't step up in the pocket if your interior is getting pushed back. If you get the edge rushers and the interior rush, I mean, that's what the Titans offense has looked like for 2 years now, because they've had horrible tackle play and very subpar center play. So you bring in Lloyd Cushenberry, you bring in JC Latham. I think it raises the floor for what this team can be so much. On top of that, the cornerback room for Tennessee has been a weakness. They had a lot of high potential guys, a lot of high draft picks, and Caleb Farley, former first-round pick, Roger McCreary, second-round pick, Christian Fulton, second-round pick. But most of those guys never lived up to their potential and to their draft pedigree. Christian Fulton had a good rookie season and sort of got worse every year after that. Caleb Farley couldn't stay healthy on the field, dealt with some horrible tragedies off the field with his father dying and his mother dying of cancer, like horrible, horrible off-field tragedies for Caleb Farley, on top of ACL tears, back surgeries, like horrible injuries that are just debilitating. So the quarterback room has been a big weakness. Titans routinely in the top of the league in passing yards allowed, passing touchdowns allowed, completion rate allowed, passer rating allowed. Like, they've just been a bad pass defense for years. Now you bring in L'Jarius Sneed, arguably a top 5, top 3 cornerback in the NFL. You bring in Chidobe Awuzie to be your cornerback 2, arguably like a top 20, top 15 cornerback in the NFL. And Roger McCreary, who was actually quietly very good last year. And now he gets to be cornerback 3 and deal with the opposing team's third best receiver. He was matched up on oftentimes the number 1 receiver for the opposing teams in the last couple of years. Now he slides down a couple pegs. I think you take what was a weakness, again, turn it into a massive strength, raise the floor for your pass defense. And again, it raises the floor for the team. So all of that to say, I think 6.5 wins is low. I would take the over on the 6.5 wins. I'm not saying the Titans are going to be a playoff team. I'm not saying they're going to win 10, 11, 12 games, although I think it's possible that they are that good. It all hinges on Will Levis. If Will Levis is a good, above average, or even a top 10 NFL quarterback as early as this season, the Titans are making the playoffs. They are winning 10, 11 games like that. You can etch that in stone. But we don't know if that's what Will Levis is. The Titans are giving him every shot to prove he's the guy, surrounding him with the talent that can help elevate his game. But if he doesn't take a step forward, if he's late on his reads, which, that was a minor issue last year. He has such a strong arm that he can be a tick late on a read and still fit the ball in a window. But eventually defenses will catch up to that. So you can't always get away with that. He's got to be a little better decision-making. You can't launch the ball 40 yards downfield into double coverage on 3rd and 3 when you have the check down open right across the sticks, right? Like, these are rookie moments that he's got to learn from. But if he doesn't take the step forward, if he continues to put the ball in harm's way because he's too aggressive and trusts his arm too much, then I could see the Titans finishing around 6 or 7 wins. But I really think 6 wins is like the worst case scenario, barring the whole team getting injured. Like, 6 wins feels really low to me. I think people are massively underrating the difference that Brian Callahan's philosophy is going to bring, that Bill Callahan, as the best offensive line coach in NFL history, is going to do for this team that had the 30th rated offensive line last year. If he just brings them up to middle of the pack, 16th, 17th, 15th, if he in some miracle makes them a top 10 offensive line, I just think that is such a massive jump and would help this team so much. So, long answer, but I do think the Titans are being underrated nationally because they're a small market. They're not a team that's going to get a lot of money and action in by the sports books because they just don't have that many fans. It's not like the Cowboys where they're always going to inflate the Cowboys line because people are always going to take the over because there's so many people. And same thing with the Chiefs. Like, we love the Chiefs. They're always good. We're always taking the over. Vegas could set the line at 14.5 wins and people would still take the over, right? Yeah. So I think 6.5 is too low. I could see a world where they go under, but I feel like the more likely outcome is that they finish between 7 and 9 wins, even if Will Levis is only average, even if the offensive line is only average, even if Calvin Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins misses 6 games with injury. I still think they can get 7 wins without too much trouble.
Okay. All right. So there you go with that if you want to place a bet. Now, I got 2 last questions, and then we'll give you we're bringing back the soapbox here. So for those of you who have been around on the show for a while, you know what I'm talking about. And those who don't, you'll see what happens. With Will Levis, really quickly, what are the chances that he is the quarterback of this team in 2025?
I would say 75%. I think it's more likely that Will Levis is good than not good. And normally I wouldn't say that about a player because, like, just look at any draft class. Most of them end up being bad, right? So most players who enter the league end up being bad. So I think there is a good chance for Will Levis just based on things that we see and hear coming out of the team. And obviously, you're hearing this about every second year quarterback at this time of year, even guys who struggled mightily as rookies. Bryce Young's getting raver. His footwork looks so much better. Like, you're hearing all these things about every young quarterback. So you got to take some of it with a grain of salt. But you look at Anthony Richardson, he's not throwing right now because he's dealing with some shoulder thing. 6 days ago, he was throwing all over the field. Now what's happening? Like, as long as you're not getting those reports that really concern you, I think you can be in a good place. So with Will Levis, it's all he's the first one in the building every day. He's constantly asking questions. He's working with the receivers after a play, talking to them about how he likes the route. He's taking what we're translating from the meeting rooms and translating it to the field. He's telling the coaches what he likes and what he doesn't like. He's taking command as a leader of the offense. He's putting in the time and the work. He's already said he's going to get the receivers together for like a retreat later this summer where they're going to go just do some bonding, spend time together, and go work on routes while they're there as well. So you're hearing all the right things. He's got an offensive-minded head coach for the first time. Titans haven't had an offensive-minded head coach since Ken Wisenhunt, and that didn't work out very well. He got fired halfway through his second year as the head coach, but it's been a long time since they had a real offensive head coach who was going to bring a modern look to this offense, a pass-friendly approach. He's got the weapons. You hope he has better pass protection. The right side of that line is still a big mystery, right guard and right tackle. No idea who's going to end up starting at those spots. But if you take all these pieces and he can't make it work, that would surprise me. It really would, because I think he flashed so much potential last year, and he showed that he can rise to big moments and big occasions like that Monday night comeback against the Dolphins. His debut, the lights were not too bright at all. He went out there and threw 4 touchdown passes with no fear, just slinging the ball all over the field, 40, 50 yards down the field, no fear. So I think mentality-wise, arm talent-wise, and even cerebral-wise, like, he's a really smart guy, got his PhD at Kentucky after graduating early from Penn State before transferring to Kentucky. Like, he is a smart person off the field. And I don't know, it would be surprising to me if he didn't end up at least being like an average quarterback in the NFL, where those big plays, that big arm is going to make up for taking too many sacks or throwing 1 or 2 too many interceptions here and there. I think the big arm and the big play mentality is going to make up for some of those mistakes.
All right, so some confidence in Will Levis.
I am confident in Will Levis. I really am. Yeah.
I mean, it makes me feel good for having him in a dynasty league. That just holding on to him. So hey, I'll take it. For OTAs and training camp, is there anything specific that you're looking at as we move through the summer here before the season?
I think a few obvious ones. Will Levis is an obvious one. Like, how's he looking out there? He's had good days and bad days. Like, he had a subpar day on Wednesday where he ended a red zone drill with an interception, so the defense won the day. But he's also had some days where he ended those drills on touchdown passes. So a little inconsistent. You sort of expect that right now, this time of year, installing a new offense. But I'm definitely tracking Will Levis's progression through this offseason. And the other big one to me is who starts at right guard and who starts at right tackle. The incumbent right guard, Daniel Brunskill, started every game he was healthy last year, is not working with the first team right now. So that's just an interesting, like, they brought in Sadiq Charles in free agency, who most people probably never heard of, but Bill Callahan wanted him. And if Bill Callahan wants him and he's an offensive lineman, you kind of got to trust what Bill Callahan thinks. So he's apparently working first team right guard right now. Right tackle, just as big a mystery. Former 3rd-round pick Nicholas Petit-Frere ended last season with an injury. Is not even out there working yet. He's still working back from the injury, still rehabbing. So he's not been on the field. So we don't know if he would be the first team right tackle if he was healthy. Right now, they're working with 2nd-year UDFA. John Ajukwu is starting at right tackle right now. But they traded for a guy that Bill Callahan worked with in Cleveland, Leroy Watson, who's, I think, a 3rd-year former UDFA. They traded for him at after Bill Callahan spent time with him in Cleveland. They went and traded for him. So he's got to be in the mix. They have former 2nd-round pick. What's his name? Shoot, hang on.
I'm probably not going to be able to help you on that one.
Dylan Radins. I don't know why I just Had a moment there. Dylan Radins, former second-round pick, was a tackle in college, but now he's working at guard, I think. So it's just a huge mystery what's going to happen. So we're definitely tracking like who's getting the most first-team reps at those two spots, and are those guys any good? Because that's the one big hole still on this Titans roster.
Okay, all right. So a lot to watch for. Hopefully, the Callahans can take care of and clean up that offensive line work, and then we see some good stuff from Levis. So, all right, maybe I'll float some music or some ticker or something under this. I keep saying I'm going to do it, and I still haven't yet. But you're going to get 60 seconds ish. You can go a little under, a little over. About you're going to stand on a soapbox, as it were, and just give us any topic, football related or otherwise, that you are currently feeling a little bit passionate about. On your marks, you set, go, Justin.
All right, let's try to do this in 60 seconds. I'm a bit of a long-winded guy, so we'll see. I'm wearing this hoodie, Dallas Mavericks hoodie right now. You can see my Luka Doncic Funko toy back here, still in the box. The Dallas Mavericks are winning the NBA Finals, and here is why. The Boston Celtics are a historically great NBA team, one of the best net ratings over the course of a season we've ever seen. Doesn't matter. The Mavs have the best player in the series, the most clutch player in the series, who is on an inevitable tear to become the best player in the world if he's not already. I grew up in Dallas. I'm a diehard Mavs fan. All the numbers and all the metrics on paper say Boston should run away with this series. They said the same thing in 2016 when the Warriors played the Cavaliers with LeBron James and Kyrie Irving. It's the Mavs' time to disrupt the numbers and the stats and whatever the metrics say should happen. Nothing can account for the Luka Doncic killer mentality. By the time you're listening to this, I'm pretty sure game one will have already happened. We're recording this on Thursday morning, so game one has not happened yet as of me saying this. It doesn't matter what happens in game one. Even if the Mavericks lose, the Mavs lost game one against the Clippers. They lost game one against the Thunder. They're a game one loser historically. The first game one that Jason Kidd ever won as the head coach was last round against the Timberwolves. So it doesn't matter what happens in that first game. They're going to bounce back. They're going to make those adjustments. I kind of expect them to lose game one. Maybe I'll sound smart tomorrow morning, or maybe I'll sound dumb. But the bottom line is you cannot stop the inevitable Luka Doncic.
All right, we'll have to see how that works out. I think the Mavs right now are like plus 180 to win, so you're definitely taking a little bit of a risk coming out with that. But
got them plus 800 3 weeks ago, baby.
Well, there you go. So hey, yeah, you have a lot of reasons then, hoping that works out. So Justin, thanks again for joining me. I appreciate it. Remind everybody where they can find your work.
Check me out on Twitter at Titans Film Room, or check out our YouTube channel for the podcast, The Music City Audible. We're really trying to grow the YouTube. So there's an audio feed as well. Don't care, subscribe, don't subscribe. Just check us out on YouTube.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks again, Justin, for being here, and everybody go check that out. Don't forget to check out our website as well at 32beatwriter.com, where we have player tracking tools, news summaries, and all sorts of other stuff coming your way. Make sure to keep, make sure to go there to keep up for all the most relevant information for the Gravedigger. I'm Zach Haiduk. We will see you guys later.